Good morning. I want to welcome the media and to thank you all very much for coming to cover what we have to say in response to the five Auditor General reports which were made public today. I know for many people it is perceived that government and the Auditor General's office are always in opposition to each other. And I think the history of responses to Auditor General's reports in the past has left something to be desired. Today I'm here with the Deputy Governor, Mr. Franz Manderson, because together we represent the two arms of government. And we have been working and continue to work together. We believe in what I call joined up government. There's but one government of the Cayman Islands. Constitutionally, we have different responsibilities, but in actuality, there is just one government of the Cayman Islands. We felt it important to send a very clear message that we take what the Auditor General says in his reports very seriously, and that the recommendations which he makes will be considered very carefully by the government. In fact, in the time that it has taken him to produce the reports, a significant number of the issues which have been raised have already been addressed or are in the process of being addressed. We want to take a little time this morning to go through some of the recommendations that he made and to indicate where the government is in dealing with these issues. We believe it's absolutely critical to the reputation of the Cayman Islands for good governance, and transparency, and accountability, that the government not only takes on board what the Auditor General says, but that it is clear and apparent to all that the government is taking these matters very, very seriously. So with those few introductory remarks, I'm going to ask the Deputy Governor to make some observations and to go through some of the recommendations and what government's response has been or is intended to be with respect to them. Following that, we'll take questions and do our very best to answer any or address any concerns which the media may have.
Premier, thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. In keeping with the Premier's vision of one government, I have been working very hard to ensure that there's good communication between the Auditor General's office and my office and the wider government. I have already put procedures in place to ensure, as the Premier said, that his recommendations are viewed seriously and properly addressed. They have a part of our performance management system. Chief officers will be graded, or their performance will be graded on how well they are responding to reports and recommendations made by the Auditor General. But I want to just deal specifically with some of the recommendations that is in the five reports. Dealing with the accountability of statutory authorities and government companies, you will see that there's a recommendation there suggesting that we make amendments to the Public Management and Finance Law. The government has already actioned this recommendation. A committee has been set up to review the Public Management and Finance Law. The committee is chaired by Councillor Mike Tigert, and the membership consists of the Financial Secretary. The Auditor General has agreed to be a member of that and as an advisor. We have a chief officer, we have government accountants, and we also have private sector representations as well. The committee has already met. First meeting was on the 17th of January, and the Premier has asked the group to have a report to him by the end of March. With regard to the governance issues on statutory authorities, as highlighted in the report, the government has established a group to prepare a public authorities law, which will address a number of governance issues, as well as some specific recommendations that was in the report. The group will comprise of representatives from the civil service, private sector, statutory authorities, and the chamber. I will be chairing that group. We will have a meeting in the next week or two. And again, we hope to have the work completed in March 2014. The government is also carrying out a rationalization review with the assistance of the private sector. We will be looking at a strategic overview of the public service and identify which functions can be privatized or contracted out, what services maybe should be discontinued or amalgamated. That is, we're getting assistance from the FCO with that, and I have promised the Premier that he will have a report towards the end of April. The recommendations that the government should provide training to chief officers, ministers, portfolios, board members, and chief officers of the statutory authority and government-owned companies on the governance framework. I'm very pleased to say that we have taken this recommendation forward. The government held a public service governance training from the 15th to the 29th of November 2013. We had over 130 board members who attended the training session, which was facilitated by Professor Anthony Clayton and Ms. Andrea Bruce from the University of the West Indies. A good governance manual has been produced and is being used by board members, and we will use that for existing board members. The training will happen again. We recognize that we also need to have that training in the sister islands, and that is now being arranged. I did open that training workshop, and I can say that the feedback from board members have been excellent, and they very much enjoyed the training session and benefited from it. In addition, the government completed 4 days of orientation training, which was led by my office along with the Cabinet Office and the Premier for the new government and for Cabinet and for MLAs after the May election to explain the governance framework and the respective roles and responsibilities of ministers and chief officers. That went exceptionally well, and that was completed in June 2013. The recommendation that the SAGC should comply with the PFML requirements for reporting to the Governor, Cabinet, and Legislative Assembly is being dealt with. And again, I've put that as part of the Chief Officer's performance agreements. And in addition, it will be addressed by the Public Authorities Law Committee. Moving to how government manages resources, there's a recommendation that government should undertake policy development in priority areas so as to clarify intended results and to better inform its planning and budgeting process. We agree with that recommendation, and the government, through the Cabinet Office, is responsible for coordinating government policy and has conducted policy training for over 300 civil servants since 2012, and that program is ongoing and will be extended to our statutory authorities and government-owned companies in 2014. The government agrees with the recommendation that it should comply with the Public Management and Finance Law when seeking authority for its planned spending, and ministers should respect the roles and responsibilities of chief officers as established by the Public Management and Finance Law. Compliance with the PFML is part of the chief officer's performance agreement and assessment process. The internal audit unit, which is now under the responsibility of my office, regular reports on compliance and assurances are produced. I held a orientation program and briefing session for the new cabinet, as I said earlier, and that has gone exceptionally well in explaining the government framework. The report says that the deputy governor should ensure that there's a clear lead responsibility identified for financial functions across the public service. As part of the deputy governor's direction on financial leadership, he should clarify the responsibility of the financial secretary for providing such leadership. Now, on this particular recommendation, there's disagreement. The responsibility for finance, financial systems, and financial reporting is, in our opinion, that responsibility lies with the Minister of Finance and not my office. And that is made very clear in the Constitution and the Public Management and Finance Law. So, like I said, on this occasion, we disagree, but that is something that we will work through with the Auditor General. The recommendation that the government should develop a conflict of interest policy that takes into consideration application within the Cayman Islands context, which covers both members of the Legislative Assembly and civil servants. Again, we agree, but I want to make it clear that this has already been, a lot of this has already been done in that the Public Service Code of Conduct, Section 5, as contained in the Public Service Management Law, is attached to every civil servant's employment agreement. Conflicts of interest is also included in the orientation program for all new civil servants. I did that this morning, spent a session with about 25 new civil servants where we explained to them what their roles and responsibilities are, what we expect of them as civil servants. We went through the Public Service Code of Conduct, which speaks about being impartial and not taking part in matters which they have a conflict, real or apparent. And of course, the Commission for Standards in Public Life legislation covers this registration. And I just want to thank the Premier for agreeing to take that bill down to the LA, I think this session. So we have made tremendous progress there. And again, I want to recognize and thank the Premier for pushing this forward. That bill has been in a state of suspension for quite a while, so we were very happy that has now been moved forward. The Premier has also agreed on having a code of conduct for cabinet members, and that has also been actioned and will contain a section on conflicts of interest. The recommendation that the government should proceed with legislation to establish the framework for the Commission for Standards in Public Life. Again, like I said, that will now be tabled in the LA at this coming session. The recommendation that the government should implement a governance structure for significant government transactions, such as procurement, that provides clarity and transparency about the roles of the governor and cabinet, ministers and chief officers. This recommendation is agreed. The government has agreed to establish new procurement legislation, which has already passed through cabinet, is now in legislative drafting. We are now in the process of recruiting a director of procurement, and that person will oversee all of government's procurement. We believe that will be a tremendous step forward and will address some of the issues that Auditor General has raised, not only in these reports, but in past reports as well. And the Minister of Finance will oversee procurement, but we will have a civil servant who is responsible for procurement. Those were the key recommendations that we picked out of the reports. I hope everyone will see that we are well ahead of the game. Under the leadership of the Premier, we are making the civil service is doing everything that we can to ensure that the recommendations of the Auditor General is viewed seriously and properly addressed.
Thank you, Deputy Governor. I hope that that is sufficient, that we won't have any questions, that everybody will be happy. Yeah. But maybe that's not the case. Yeah. So we're welcome to take, we welcome any questions and happy to take them right now.
Thank you. Good morning. The first question that I have really is, given the findings, not just of these reports, but everything that the Auditor General has been saying for the last 5 years or so, how can you both reassure the public, who are bearing a very, very heavy tax burden to pay for government, that their money has not been misspent at best, or at worst, abused or misappropriated, because people are struggling to pay duty and everything, and this is going into your coffers, and nobody's able to tell us what you're doing with it?
Well, I'm not sure about the last bit. No one is able to tell us. I think we have quite a robust system of accounting in place. In the past, probably 6-7 years, government has struggled to really produce properly audited reports and so forth. I agree. This is a new administration. We've taken a new approach to the matter. We're taking these issues very, very seriously. And as the Deputy Governor, I'm sure, will be able to cite in terms of examples, the reporting regime has improved significantly in the last perhaps a year or so.
That's correct, sir.
I don't know whether the Deputy Governor wants to
Yes.
pick up on that particular point.
Yes, I accept that we were not up to speed for a few years, but that has been changing over the last 2 years and definitely in the last year. Just yesterday in Cabinet, we were dealing with the audited financial statements of two, one my office and a SAGC for 2013. Those will be forwarded to the LA. In the last 2 weeks, I believe, in Cabinet, we had got a number of other audited financial statements for our ministries and portfolios that are all being forwarded down to the LA. Those are record times in which we are now getting reports to the Auditor General, getting his responses and getting them down to the LA. So times have changed, and I think people can now see with confidence how their money is being spent.
Because we've I mean, certainly since we've taken office, there are a number of things, and culture takes time to change, but we are consistently working to drive down government's overall expenditure. It is challenging, but we've met the challenge so far, and presently government's expenditure is tracking significantly below even the budgeted sums. Let's hope and pray that continues, but that doesn't just happen. You've got to stay on top of it. So there's that, which is the overall expenditure of government. But also, it is not satisfactory, in my view, for government not to be able to account properly for its expenditure. And that message is being sent consistently to right across the public service that late reporting or not reporting at all or slipshod reporting is not something that the government is going to countenance, and that there are going to be consequences that flow from failure to do these things and to do them timely and properly. If we don't take that no nonsense approach, the culture will never change.
I just think you misunderstood. I wasn't so much talking about the actual financial reportings. I think what I was talking about was where Alistair Swarbrick's team has spoken about this problem with us not really, the strategic policy statement isn't matching up with output, so we don't know what you've done. So in other words, we know that you've collected a lot of money, but we don't know what you spent it on. And whether you've accounted it for it is not so much the issue. I'm not talking about the actual financial reports. I'm talking about you're not explaining to us what you've done. And I'm talking generally, when I say you, Mr. Manderson, I mean generally government isn't telling the people how it spent that $500 million every year.
Right. Yeah, I think the point that he made is that we are focusing on outputs and not necessarily on outcomes. And we understand that we need to do a better job in that area. The review of the Public Management and Finance Law will look at all of those things to see how we can improve those systems and how we can do a better job on focusing on outcomes, but also have that joined up approach where once our political leaders set their vision in terms of the strategic policy statement, that we in the civil service are then that is our priority and that we work towards that. We understand that we need to do a better job in that area.
Because what we're interested in are results and achieving objectives,
Yes.
not in just activity. And that is one of the points that we are pressing home, is that it's really not enough for you just to turn up at work and to go through the motions and to push the paper and to do what you do normally. The objective must be for you to do the things to help the government achieve the results and its stated objective. So that, as I said, these things are part of a culture that takes time to change. The Deputy Governor and I have spoken about the need, although it's been talked about for years and years, to have a more performance-based, performance-driven civil service, so that people get rewarded for having achieved results rather than for just turning up at work on a regular basis. That although the legislation has been around for a while, getting the culture to change is the real challenge. But we must. And I think the times that we are in are perhaps, although difficult they do provide the opportunity and the environment now to let everyone understand that your job and the continuation of your job is contingent on your performance, because government is under constant pressure to reduce expenditure and to divest itself of more and more functions. And quite frankly, if what you are doing or not doing isn't helping the government achieve its overall objectives, then we must ask whether we really need that particular function, that job, and that individual.
So speaking of expenditure, one of the items that the Auditor General outlined is that he believes the framework is sound, and when he speaks of framework in that instance, he's talking about the legislation. But then at the same token, he refers to the framework being complex. When asked, well, what did you mean by that? He's talking about the size, that is the expenditure, and the body count. We know that there are systems in place to try and address that, but it seems like it needs to be more expedient. How do you refer to that specific complaint, if you will, as he outlined, that it's just too complex, i.e. it's too large, too much money involved, and it's not working under the current legislation, which he deems sound?
When you say what are you speaking of? It is not working. What is not working?
That current relationship. Then it's the system is too complex, and he talked about it being the size. It's not matching up. Then so systems are running awry.
Well, I think we've all come to the conclusion that the public management and finance law that we have in place is not the best fit for the purpose for which it's intended. That it is unduly complex, and there are too many. I'm not sure what I call them, but there are too many stops along the way. There are too many steps that are required in a system that is as small as ours is, and that a big part of the job and the undertaking of this committee, which is chaired by Councillor Mark Taggart, is to review the public management and finance law, and the Auditor General is part of that, for us to hopefully come up with a new legislative framework for financial management of the government, which is easier to operate, which doesn't create a whole range of complex steps, which previous experience have proven are not only unnecessary, but actually mean that government is often in breach of the legislation because it just doesn't have the resources to be able to comply with all of this series of many, many steps. So we believe if we get the framework to where it needs, that framework to where it needs to be, that will be the basis for us being able to do address a whole lot of these other concerns which arise from that. We believe that, what the objective of the PMFL is salutary, that we do need a system of accrual accounting. We do need a system where there is accountability and where it is clear. The lines of authority for spending and so forth are clear. But I think everyone has now come to the view that after some 10 years of operation, that what we have is too complex for the size of government that we have, and for the population that we have, and for the requirements of the Cayman Islands generally. So
the impression that he left me with was that he felt that the expenditure was still too large, that there was still too many people in the streets. Is that something that, I know that we're trying to work on the body count aspect of things, but in terms of lowering the expenditure, is that something that, it's something we talk about all the time. Once again, it's cropped up in one of his reports. Is it something that we could be more expedient working towards?
Well, the Deputy Governor has spoken to that in part of his presentation this morning when he spoke about the review that is underway, rationalization process that is underway, to look at what businesses, if I may call them that, government ought not to be in. And that is that I think is the way that we are going to be able to reduce the overall footprint of government and expenditure of government. We've done, even in the 8 months since we've been here, government expenditure has come down by budgeted expenditure by $25 million. It was $12 million in the previous budget, another $12 million off of that in the budget that just went through. Whether we can keep doing that without significant changes to the structure of government and to the business that government is in, all of us doubt. And so it will require structural change to really get government expenditure significantly below the current levels, which I think are projected to be somewhere around 539 million for the current year. If we are aiming to get government expenditure down to 400 million, we won't achieve that without significant structural change. And I think everybody needs to understand that, because even if we send home huge numbers of civil servants, those services still have to be done by somebody. And so it's not possible without structural change.
Can I just follow up on that, because it's a little similar? Throughout your time in opposition, you constantly pointed to the Miller-Shaw report as being a way to cut civil service spending. Obviously, that's been around a long time. I think a lot of people in the public sector, in the private sector or the public at large, struggle to understand why it's taking so long, because we've been talking about divestment, privatization for 5, 6 years. Can you explain why it takes this long?
That's the Deputy Governor's question.
Yeah. Well, I think I can't answer your question of why it's taken so long before. I can talk about what's happening now. One of the things that I did when upon appointment was to pull together all the reports that had been done, the Miller-Shaw, there was a Keith Luck report, all of these reports that talked about ways in which we could make government more efficient, to reduce our costs, and pull out the recommendations that were in those reports and look to have them implemented, which is what we're doing now. That will form part of the work of the committee that Mr. McTaggart is chairing. He will have a few reports there to look at which contain agreed recommendations. So it's all about leadership, it's all about accountability, it's all about prioritizing, and making things happen. And that is what the Premier and I are committing to do, is to make things happen. That is essentially our jobs, is to make things happen. And I want to assure the Premier here, and I have done so privately, that the civil service is committed to ensuring that whatever we need to do, we will get on with it.
Well, let me say, at the risk of saying some things that are a bit controversial, I know. Let me say, these are observations of mine. I've been around the process now for more than 13 years in every capacity except that of Speaker. So I've seen this from a whole range of angles. Everybody believes, or I should say most people believe, that we need to reduce the overall body count of the public service. And that is laudable. But we have to remember this. The majority of the public service is made up of Caymanians who have lives and families and mortgages to pay and all of that. So government cannot simply, this is my view, decide the optimum size of the public service ought to be 2,500 instead of 3,600 or whatever it is, and go about a process ruthlessly to trim the civil service down to that size without bearing in mind the social consequences of that action. So whatever steps government takes with respect to reducing body count has to be in a measured way so that the Caymanians who would no longer be part of the public service actually wind up in jobs and positions somewhere within the Cayman Islands. That's point number one, which is often overlooked when people talk about what we're going to do with this. Because then if we simply send them home, if we think there are many Caymanians crying now because they're unemployed, you send home You send home 50 civil servants to see what happens. See how many mortgages get defaulted on, how many school fees don't get paid. So government has to bear all of those things in mind. Because ultimately, when people are unemployed and require assistance, it is the government they turn in any event. So government has to bear that in mind. Government cannot act as a private sector employer and just send people home and say, well, whatever happens to you, happens to you. So that is a factor you have to bear in mind. The other point, which I'm not sure everyone appreciates, over the course of the last 20 years or so, government has created, has spun off, I think there are some 19 statutory authorities or government-owned companies, spun off functions which would otherwise have been performed by central government to statutory authorities and government-owned companies. There will be those who say otherwise, but my view of that is that by and large, that has not saved government money, but has in fact costed government more. If you look at the salaries that are paid to those in the statutory authorities and government-owned companies compared to those who hold similar positions within central government, you'll be absolutely astounded. There are those in the statutory authorities at the upper levels of statutory authority that earn significantly more than the governor, let alone me, or the deputy governor for that matter. One of the things that we are looking at and thinking about is whether some of these functions couldn't actually, and this is going the opposite way, actually be better and more cheaply provided by central government. Because I'm not going to start naming them, but I've looked at some of these and wondered how we justify the cost of this statutory authority. Because in some cases, those functions could, in my view, could be performed in central government at the cost substantially less. Mm-hmm. So it's not just simply a question of saying government shouldn't be doing this and government shouldn't be doing that, and therefore we hive them off. We have to look critically at whether or not this is actually going to result in cost savings to government. Mm-hmm. If the private sectors can pick it up, well, that's another matter. But then we also have to look at the cost of that, producing that product or that service to the consumer. Because if I take the water authority as an example, if we, and there are great pressures to sell the water authority, if we sell the water authority off, for instance, to Consolidated Water, we then have a monopoly. I am not sure that is going to, without adequate regulation and a regulatory system which we'll have to set up, I'm not sure that is going to result in a better deal to the consumer. So I give you these examples because I think it's important that there's a tendency in the wider public to think that it's just a simple exercise. The government just ought to get rid of these things, and then we don't have to worry about government having to pay for it. But somebody's going to have to pay for it, and in most instances, it's going to wind up being the consumer. I probably got in trouble with all of that, but that's how I feel.
Sticking with the statutory authorities and government companies, it seems like the Auditor General, with his 2 reports on the matter, thinks that the reporting from them is not up to snuff. Some are doing good, a majority are not. Some didn't even respond to the survey. How is core government, as you guys, as core government, reel in those SAGCs and make sure that they get up to snuff with the reporting and actually answer some of the Auditor General's requests on these matters? Yeah. Obviously, it's kind of like, to me, it seems like it's a slap in the face to the Auditor General not even to respond to the survey.
Yeah. Well, this is a problem. Accountability generally from the statutory authorities and government-owned companies is a problem. There are some, as you say, and the Auditor General has rightly pointed out, that do very well. But generally, it is a problem. The Public Authorities Bill, or the idea of a Public Authorities Bill, has been around for a while. It certainly was around when I was last minister from 2005 to 2009. It didn't get put forward then because there were significant objections from some of the statutory authorities and government-owned companies. Given our experience and given where we are, this government is committed to doing so. We do not believe that the statutory authorities and government-owned companies can operate completely outside the broad umbrella of government without regard to what obtains in the country generally and the government in particular. I think there is a tendency in the minds of some of those who are, control these companies that they are essentially a completely independent entity out there doing whatever they want. That's not the case at all. They are creatures of the government. Their shareholder is the government, and they're out there to carry out functions which government at the time felt would be better carried out by a semi-autonomous body. But they are still an integral part of the government, and they cannot operate, as though they are a privately owned company. I mean, we've had instances where, with some of these companies, where when civil servants had to take a cut in salary, they get increases, they get paid bonuses. The staff of some of these authorities. We can't allow that situation to obtain. We are all public servants in that context, whether we work for the civil service or central government, or we work for a statutory authority or government-owned company. So we are taking all of these matters very seriously. The Public Authorities Bill is a long ways down the road in terms of legislative drafting, and it is something that we hope to get through this year.
So is there any ramifications for the ones that didn't respond to the survey as far as core government is concerned?
I'll let the Deputy Governor, because he knows more about how you deal with those things than I do, but
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the Auditor General didn't give some names there and highlighted people that were doing very well. So I mean, that's part of the process there. But as looking at how we solve this problem is that I obviously need to engage more, with the Auditor General, find out exactly which authorities did not respond, and with the assistance of chief officers, hold those people to account. But as the Premier has highlighted, we have to have that overarching piece of legislation that gives ministers more responsibilities for their arm length bodies. We have to do it.
That was going to be my first question. Was what is the Public Authorities Bill going to seek to do? Is it just going to seek to bring these authorities back under more of the control of the central government? Is that the general idea?
It's not necessarily back into, but we have to give chief officers and ministers more responsibility. I mean, for example, when we were doing the 3.2%, there was a question arose as to, well, how can we mandate this for our public authorities? And that should not be a question. It should be if the government of the day decide that there is a salary cut for public service, that's the end of it. And we shouldn't have to go through a mechanism. The policymakers make the decision and it's implemented across the entire public service. But it's also about ensuring that they have good or similar HR systems, financial systems, that how they go about dealing with recruitment. The Auditor General talks about how their CEOs are appointed. All those things should be consistent across our statutory authorities. We have this situation, for example, where the governor appoints some of the CEOs. I mean, we don't believe that should exist. It should be one common way in which, for example, CEOs are appointed across all of our arm length bodies, and not have the governor, the board, cabinet, different appointees, for example. So it's about bringing consistency and accountability for all our statutory authorities.
Okay, and I don't know if you gentlemen have this these reports right there in front of you. I just want to ask a specific question on the survey of statutory authorities that were done. They went through and they had they asked for a register of potential conflict of interest from the 17 authorities that responded. 9 respondents indicated they did not have a register. 6 said yes, and 1 said yes, but only for senior managers. Of the 7 who had a register, 3 said it would be available to the public upon request, subject to freedom of information legislation, which I take to mean they're going to fight you tooth and nail before they release it. Now, is that information, Mr. Premier, going to be required to come out in the public standards bill anyway? Are they going to be required to release that information?
Yes. Well, the standards in public life law, when it becomes law, will apply right across the board.
Okay. So they're going to have to release this anyway.
Yeah.
Mr. Manderson,
Mhm.
you've told us in the newspaper,
Mhm.
so it must be true, that Cayman Islands has an open government.
That's right.
Doesn't sound like it to me. I mean, why if they're going to have to release this anyway, why don't they release it?
Yeah. Again, I go back to what the Premier says, is changing the culture and us committing to doing things better. But that bill that is being taken down to the LA shortly will solve a lot of this problem in terms of it is very clear about who has to complete the conflicts of interest or their interest policy, and it should be made public. So I don't.
There's just one last question. I don't want to talk about how much you gentlemen make in salary, but can you give us an idea of how much more some of these heads of statutory authorities might make than you? I mean, we're talking about a few $1,000s, tens of thousands.
Lots.
Well, is it more than $10,000?
Oh yes. Oh yes, much more.
More than
that.
100,000?
But the thing is, government salaries are a matter of public record, so you can go look it up.
Again, if we're talking about open government, you could just tell me now.
But I'd be guessing.
Yeah.
But I can promise you, it's a lot more than $10,000 a year. I don't want to cite figures which are not going to be accurate, and then you report them, and then I get blamed for it.
Easy?
Easy.
Well,
Just one final question given, I mean, Donna did make it very clear that we're not supposed to ask any other questions. And despite that, what I would like to ask is, I have a catalogue of questions that I'd like to ask that I cannot seem to get answered by government. I tried it with Mr. Tibbets on Thursday and got slapped in the face then and still haven't had my answers to my questions. Are we likely to have a press briefing anytime in the future where we can start, where we used to have a more regular communication with government? It seems to have disappeared. Why has it disappeared? And when can I get my questions answered about a one man, one vote? What's happening with DART, the Easterly Tibbets, the East-West Arterial going through the Mastic Trail, various questions about what government people own land around that. There's a lot of questions, and so just wondering when government can find time to answer them for us. I'm not the only one, I think.
well, I do my best to answer questions which are put to us. I've said before, we are not adopting a policy of weekly or monthly press briefings on a whole range of things, so the media can sit there and take pot shots at us. But if you have questions, let us have the questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. I suppose that's it, really. Well, the thing is that when you say we have them, but I'm not about to engage in a whole lot of speculation on stuff that I hear the opposition carrying on the talk show about. If there is a specific issue, then the government will take a position with respect to it. But I'm not going to engage in this back and forth. I've been down that road too many times, and it never helps. Any other questions? Well, thank you all again.
Thank you very much.